Hey Book Dragons, welcome back to my channel. Today we're reviewing some Gothic horror classics. Let's go. Thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate all you do to support the channel. So I recently read, for the very first time actually, Dracula by Bram Stoker, Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I thought, why not just talk about them all in one video? They're all fairly short books, and they kind of fit into this same genre of Gothic horror. So I thought we'd just talk a little bit about them and what my thoughts were on them, and there we go. Please make sure that if you enjoyed today's video, like the video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already. That would be great. I'm going to start off talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula. This book was published in 1897, and it is a staple of the horror genre. Whenever I would tell people that I had not read Dracula yet, they were like, how is that even possible? You know, I don't know why I never have, but I have now. And I have to say, it was an absolutely brilliant book, and it ages very, very well. It does not feel ancient. It does not feel old. It feels very fresh and new. Even by today's standards. You know, we all have cell phones and we have cars and things like that, but I think there's probably a part in a lot of us that just kind of wants that return to the old times, back to those days of the 1800s where you had to ride trains and you had horse-drawn carts and things like that, and life was much more simple. And you definitely find that in Bram Stoker's Dracula. And it's written in an epistolary format, and what that means is the entire story is told by way of letters back and forth between the different characters and journal entries that they make regarding the events that are happening all around them. We start the story following Jonathan Harker's writings. Now, Jonathan is a solicitor, which would kind of be the equivalent of a realtor and maybe some aspects of a lawyer thrown in. He is on his way by train to the home of a Count Dracula in Transylvania to meet with him and conduct business on some properties that Dracula wants to purchase. And these properties are in England, and Dracula is actively seeking out multiple places, and he even brings up at one point, is it permissible to have multiple solicitors, because he's looking at purchasing multiple properties in various locations around England. So Jonathan, goes and he meets with him. He stays in Dracula's house, and he starts to notice a great deal of very peculiar things about Count Dracula. He never seems to eat, or not at the times that Jonathan Harker is eating, although he always provides a fancy feast for Mr. Harker, and it's just peculiar that the Count does not eat with him, and he disappears for long periods of time, and it's just very creepy and very odd. And this is where we really start to pick up on the horrors that are happening in this world. Even the townsfolk avoid even talking about the Count or helping Jonathan with directions when he first gets there, that sort of thing. So it's very, very subtly creepy as the Count gets passage to England. There are various different things that start happening certain people in the story start developing strange illnesses and having visitations at night. The windows are all of a sudden open, whereas they were closed before, and there's just all these strange occurrences that start happening, and there's various different characters that we follow. Lucy Westenra is one of the characters that we meet very early on in the story. She is a good friend of Wilhelmina Murray, who is very fond of Jonathan Harker, and they've kind of been dating. And all of a sudden, Lucy begins to exhibit severe illness, and they can't figure out what's wrong with her, and they bring in various different people because she's had 3 different suitors, and she finally chooses on one suitor. And but the other men still care for her, and we get their journal entries and letters as well. We see them interacting with each other and trying to figure out what's happening with her. And they call in Dr. Van Helsing, who is a colleague of one of the suitors. And he was a professor of his back at university. And so he calls Professor Van Helsing in to take a look at the situation and figure out what's going on. And it just keeps compounding this subtle, creepy terror, and that the tension just keeps building and building, and it may not seem at times like anything is really going on, but a lot is going on. You just feel it, so you can't put the book down. And I just absolutely adored this book. It was very easy to read. The prose is old-fashioned and wordy, but not in an off-putting way. And it's very digestible, very easy to read. And it's just an absolutely amazing story. Like, this is one of my favorite reads of 2022 easily. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I will definitely read it again at some point. One thing that really struck me is it led me to think back to the adaptation that I saw several years ago. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and that is Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman, and Gary Oldman plays Count Dracula, and Keanu Reeves plays Jonathan Harker, and Winona Ryder is Mina Murray, and so you've got all these big name actors that fit into this movie, right? What really impressed me, though, because I never read the book, you hear all these things about adaptations taking a lot of liberties. That movie was actually spot on in so many ways. It followed the text very closely. And so as I was reading Dracula, looking back, I was very impressed with the adaptation. And now I need to go watch the movie again because it's been years since I've watched it. So very impressed with that. The next book I want to talk about is Carmilla. And this is another vampire novel, or I should say novella. It's very short. It's a little over 100 pages. And some sources say that it is the inspiration, or at least one of the inspirations, for Bram Stoker in writing Dracula. Carmilla was published in 1872, and it follows a fairly well-to-do family in the countryside of France. They are eagerly awaiting a friend to arrive, and he will be bringing with him his daughter, who they hope will be a play companion with their daughter, Laura. And they get word all of a sudden that he is not going to be able to arrive. His daughter has come down mysteriously sick, and they can't figure out what's wrong with her, and so they're going to have to cancel their trip to visit this family. And then shortly after that, a horse and carriage crashes in front of their house, and this older woman and her daughter, Carmilla, end up coming out of the horse and carriage, and they fix the horse and carriage, but the mother keeps saying about how she's on her way to a very urgent meeting. She can't be late. She needs to get on the road, and the daughter is still very shaken up. So this family invites Carmilla to stay with them while her mother goes, and then she will come back and retrieve her daughter at some point. The story begins from there with this very odd little tale about this strange girl, Carmilla, who quickly develops a very strong fascination with Laura. And it does have very subtle homosexual overtones. But what was cool about it is, especially for a book from that era, the homosexuality was treated very neutrally. It wasn't what you might typically expect with being condemned to sin or anything like that. It was just treated in a very matter-of-fact way. You know, she had a lovely fascination with this girl that she'd come to stay with. And so I thought that was really cool. But that's just a side note. But anyway, they begin to see things happening, and Carmilla is just this very strange girl, and she sleeps at odd hours, and they begin to suspect that something is going on with her, something's not right, and then all of a sudden Laura begins to get sick as well. And so you see all these things happening in this very, very short little story. But I tell you what, guys, it is just an amazing little book. I had a hard time deciding which I liked better, if I liked Carmilla better or if I liked Dracula better. I can't decide, really. I mean, they're both so good. One thing that was interesting is Carmilla, at least in this book, vampires can tolerate some daylight. I mean, it weakens them, and they can't be out in it for very long, but they can tolerate daylight, or at least from my reading of it, that's what I was able to get from it. It's apparently the sun does not affect them quite as much as vampires in other stories. So, and no, Carmilla wasn't shiny. Twilight fans, I'm sorry, she doesn't shine. But it was really, really a good book, and I highly, highly recommend that you read Carmilla. And it feels, again, it feels very fresh, even despite the era that it was set in. Finally, I want to talk about Frankenstein. Now, Frankenstein, I will say right off the bat, it did not totally do it for me. I liked it, but it wasn't nearly as engaging of a read as Dracula or Carmilla were. Frankenstein was, of course, written by Mary Shelley, and it follows Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who is discovered in a frozen wasteland, and he is brought on board this ship, and he begins to recount his tale of following this person that he created across many different countries, and hoping to catch up to him and to beg this person to set him free. And it just so happens that the sailors on board the boat have seen this person previous to finding Dr. Frankenstein. And so he goes on the boat and he begins to recount his tale of creating this person and how he came to all of the knowledge necessary to do so. And after many years, he encounters the creature, and the creature begins to regale him with the stories of his life and his pains and his heartaches, and basically demands that Victor Frankenstein create a companion for him. And so, if he does not do so, he is going to ruin Victor Frankenstein's life. And it is not so much of a creepy horror story as it is a psychological horror story, and a story that delves very deeply into the human condition and the themes of redemption and ethics and moral obligations and things like that. It's very theme heavy. And we get two different perspectives. We mostly get Victor Frankenstein's perspective, but we also get the creature's perspective for a good chunk of the book, and how the creature, who is human, he's a human that Dr. Frankenstein has created, but he has to learn and grow and gain knowledge and learn how to speak the language and things like that. And by the time he sees Dr. Frankenstein again, he is very clearly a genius. I mean, he is just brilliant. The eloquence with which he speaks, and the pain and the anguish that is evident in his story is just heart-wrenching. And I think that was probably my favorite part of the book, was hearing Frankenstein's monsters story. And he's viewed as a monster by so many people, but he's human. He may look like a monster, but deep down he has the same fears and emotions that any other human does. And I think it was a really good lesson in what it means to be human, to have all these emotions and learn how to deal with them. And this creation of Victor Frankenstein's does not always make the wisest choices, and he's very impulsive, and he's easily angered and frustrated. And if only Dr. Frankenstein would listen to him and hear him out and have some compassion on him. And I think that's what the creature really craves, is compassion and empathy and companionship. Ultimately, he wants someone to call his own, because he sees Victor Frankenstein, he's got this companion. So the creature's logic is, why can't I have companionship as well? And it's just this fascinating tale. And the prose in this book is very, very beautiful and elegant, and again very wordy like Dracula was, but it felt very wooden at times as well. It was hard to read at times, just because it didn't feel like a natural pace of the storytelling, because you were constantly being bombarded with these very, very complex words at times, and having to look up different words and figure out, okay, what are they talking about? Most of the words are pretty common, or they can be easily figured out what it's saying by reading the context around it. But sometimes there are words you have to look up, and it's like, whoa, okay, that kind of pulled me out of the story. Despite all of that, I think it was still a very good book, but it's probably not something that I would read again. If I had to read any of these books again, I would definitely reread Dracula. I would probably reread Carmilla. Frankenstein, not so much. No, I don't really have any interest in rereading it, but I did enjoy it for the most part, and I think it is one of those books that everyone should read once, or at least try to read it once. There were points in the book where I definitely thought, okay, am I just gonna end up DNFing this? Because it's kind of a slog. But I ended up finishing it, and I'm really glad I did, because while the ending was very tragic, it felt very beautiful and heartwarming, and a very human ending. And as I said, it does deal with a lot of themes. Morality and ethics are really huge in this book. One of the things that I really enjoyed that this book explored was the subject of boundaries. Where do you draw the line? Victor Frankenstein essentially played God. He created this creature and did not think through all the implications of what it would mean to bring something to life, to create this life and put it out into the world without thinking what it would do to the creature that he created. He created it as a testament to science and scientific exploration and research and experimentation. His reasons for creating the creature were not really wholesome at all, and he did not think about where to draw the line. And I think that is a huge statement in this book, to take care with the pursuits that you engage in, that you don't take them too far and in a way that are going to do damage to the people that are in your circle of influence. In this particular case, a person that you have created, thinking about others more than yourself, and not being so caught up in your own ego. And so there's so many things that this brought to light. And so while the story was not the greatest, I think the themes that are explored are well worth reading the book. And so those are my thoughts on these 3 books. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you read these books? What were your thoughts on them? What was your experience like reading them? If you have not read them and you have other questions about the books to kind of help determine if it's something you want to read, let's talk about that in the comments as well. I'd love to dialogue with you. And I am just so happy that I finally got around to reading these books, and I don't know why. I don't know why I waited so long. Dracula especially, I'm thinking very strongly about getting myself a nice collector's edition of it because I liked it that much. So that's all I have to say, guys. Make sure you are reading more books. Talk with me in the comments. Chat with you soon.